it doesn't exist in a format that I can give it to you. It'd be a lot easier if I could print it out and hand it to you, but that's where we're at right now. How's everybody doing? A lot of material, right? Doing okay with that? Doing okay, good, good.
You said you were thinking about doing like a how to study thing, and I feel like that would be amazing, because I felt like Harry Potter, like when he's like, I must not tell lies, and I'm writing it over and over and over again. So I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but yeah.
I mean, you know, that movie got a lot right. If your fingers aren't bleeding, you're not studying hard enough, right? Yeah, well, we can talk about that some. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, there's different ways to study for different people. This would actually be something nice to get from everybody. Maybe we can all start a thread in the Slack channel, invite everybody to it. And I would love to hear what people are currently doing and how well that's working. And I can post my ideas. You know, I'm always a little bit nervous to tell people how to study because I know what works for me. But I don't necessarily know what's going to work for other people. So I would love to get a diversity of opinions on this. But I will be happy. I will be happy to put in everything I know, and I might make a quick video about it. Great. Okay, everyone who's on the Slack has been added to study tips as a channel. So we can do that there. Yeah, thanks for that, Nicole. It's challenging. I mean, like, I mentioned the book Moonwalking with Einstein for anyone here who feels really nerdy about getting weird with their memory. But outside of creating memory palaces for the entirety of Bensky, there's a lot of techniques, and which one you want to do is going to be individual. There seemed to be some confusion about the whole chief, deputy, assistant, envoy thing. Is that just one or two people? How many people are feeling a little funny about that? Like the dosing stuff, I mean, like, it's not wildly important, but there were a number of messages I got about it. Not so much. People are okay.
I feel kind of lost with the contraindications, you know.
Okay.
Like Bijou, heat in the blood, yet it's for, well, I don't know. I guess I'm confusing myself, but I find that really hard to keep track of the different things. If anyone has
sure.
that.
Yeah, so first off, that's a great, I would love to have people engage in conversation about that. Let me pull up Bijou and I'll put it up on the board. And then in like 15, 20 minutes, I'm gonna go back to the desk and we're just gonna dive into lecture, but I think it's important to spend some time reviewing and going over questions, and I can use this board for that. So, okay. And let me know if you guys can't see things. I mean, I'm gonna be in the way a little bit, but I'll do my best. I can spell. You guys get graded on spelling. I don't. Bijou. Yeah, that's fairly centered. Okay. So, warm, acrid, lung, spleen, stomach. Expel wind. Eliminate dampness. Unblock nasal passages. And stop pain. Reduces swelling. Expels pus. Expels dampness. Stops discharge. And with gun sow for ulcers. So that's the sort of shorthand I would use for writing out the herb. And then we got a contraindication here. So,
which is where it gets confusing because it says it expels pus, but if don't use if there's heat in the blood, but isn't pus heat in the blood?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
Pus is usually dampness. So you can have rashes that are heat in the blood. those rashes might come with pus, but pus is usually going to be dampness. So pus is going to be white or yellow, with white usually being damp or damp cold, and yellow being damp heat. So heat in the blood, you're more likely to get like rashes on the body and bleeding. And for pus, it's just going to be dampness. So someone who has like eczema with yellow weeping sores and a lot of redness, we're probably more likely to be looking at dampness. But if it's just like white or clear, it's really actually, that's an error. White is usually going to be damp cold. Clear is usually going to be damp. So if you just have a fluid-filled cyst or sac, that's usually just dampness. You guys all able to see this? This working for people? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So when we say expel pus here and reduce swelling, we're talking about damp and damp cold because of the temperature, right? If this was cool or cold and we were expelling pus, then we might be talking about damp heat. But reduce swelling, expel pus, that's going to be damp or damp cold. And if we look in Bensky, come on, computer. If we look in Bensky, he's going to elaborate on that. So Baija reduces swelling, expels pus for early stage superficial sores and carbuncles. Not that we get a lot of carbuncles. If the sore, ulcer, or carbuncle has not yet opened, then this will reduce the swelling. If there's already pus or the sore is ulcerated, then this can be used to push it out. So sometimes you get these like, patients will come in, not so much in the States, but in other places, or if you're working with impoverished populations, if you're working with people who don't have access to healthcare, you're going to get patients who come in who have sores that don't heal well, that kind of keep refilling with pus. That's fairly common. They could be like cystic acne that keeps reappearing, for example. This is the sort of thing we talk about when like, yeah, it's open and we drain it, and then a week later it's back in the same place. This is one of the herbs we can use to help push that out. So that's what we're talking about here. We don't use this with heat in the blood because we don't really want to heat them up. That's the main reason. Like, so in general, we're not going to use this if the person's hot, but we specifically don't want to use this if the person has heat in the blood or yin deficiency or sores that don't have to be pushed out. Like if the sore is already fully pushed out, stop trying to push it out. It's not going to help. Yin deficiency, pretty much this whole chapter, we don't want to use anything with yin deficiency because, I mean, really, it's actually pretty, Christy, I think you're probably overcomplicating it.
That is probably true.
Which, like, all of you should overcomplicate something this semester if you're thinking about it. That's just going to be standard. Not with heat. Not with yin blood fluid deficiency. That's it. You don't use acrid stuff if acrid's drying and it's moving, and you don't really want to use that if the person's already dry. That could be yin blood and or fluids. And you don't want to warm someone up if they're already hot. That's about it. So we're going to get different versions of cautions and contraindications with each of these herbs for the specific things that are especially bad for the herbs. But really all of them are going to be some version of like, don't heat up a person who's hot. Don't dry out a person who's dry. And then we're just getting specifics. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for instance, if you were to use this on someone who had really dry, if you misdiagnose someone with dry, itchy skin as having a damp condition, and you tried to use a lot of Baija to push the dryness out of, to push the dampness out of them, you're most likely going to make their skin much more dry, and you might cause a rash as opposed to venting out a rash. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. Any other questions about what we're talking about so far? Especially that sort of question of like, I don't really get how to think about this thing. Okay, that's good. I'm really happy with how the Slack conversations are going. That's great. So keep it up. If we have, you know, a few pages of discussion every week on there, you guys are all going to be experts by the end of the semester. I think everyone's on this Slack. Please send me a direct message if you aren't, or if you're not sure somehow, and we'll make sure we get you on there. Just gonna get some water. I'll be right back, and we will start. This is a really nice way to end a clinic day, I've got to say. Teaching. Okay. No more questions. Well, then we're pretty much just diving right into this, okay? So we wrapped up end of last week with Xixin. So we're going to be diving into Sheng Jiang. This one's real and easy, just ginger. Just a little bit more housekeeping. So the current intent, last week I was confused about I was uncertain about how long this class was supposed to go. I was given one set of information. You guys were given another set of information. This will be a 14-week, 2-hour-a-week course. Okay, I think that ends up being something close to like 2 hours and 20 minutes every week, but that's the plan. So we're going to be going till about 8:40 today, as opposed to 9:20. I'm planning on, instead of giving a weekly quiz, we're going to be doing a quiz the week after we finish each section. So once we're done with Warm Acrid Release Exterior, you guys get a quiz the next time we start class. And I will emphasize that each time we pass one of those markers, okay? So we will finish all the Warm Acrid Release Exterior today, and then we'll have a quiz on it next week. This should also be a nice way of making sure that we stay on track. Okay, so let's dive into this. Make sure I got this set up right. Great. Okay, Sheng Jiang, Zingiberis, Rhizoma recens. The recens in this part means fresh, it means like recent. So this is going to be contrasted with other types of ginger: dried ginger, blast fried ginger, sand charred ginger. We're going to go over the types later on. Well, really, we'll go over them next semester. But for now, we mean Sheng Jiang, which means fresh ginger. This is one of the only fresh herbs that we use regularly. Very often in Chinese herbal pharmacy, which I'd recommend you guys poke your heads into semi-regularly, do little tours of Chinatown. You will very often see at the end of the table in which herbs are being prepared, there's often a thing that looks like a really something between a paper cutter and something you'd find in a butcher shop, which is like a little like cleaver mechanism that's used for cutting ginger. It's one of the only like single-use tools that you're going to be seeing in most herb shops. Ginger's slightly warm and acrid. The dried versions get hotter. So in this case, slightly warm and acrid. So in the warm release, acrid release exterior category. So you know that that warmth and acridity is going to be moving outwards. It's going to go to the lung, the spleen, and the stomach. So we know this is going to affect the digestive system. If you see spleen and stomach, you can just go probably affecting the digestive system. And we're going to the lung for the exterior. So this is less focused on the urinary bladder. The herb releases the exterior and disperses cold. The name of the chapter. Great, done. All we're really saying here is that it's warm and acrid and goes to the lungs. Warms the middle burner and alleviates vomiting. This is one of the most well-known herbal things to the general public. Ginger is good for nausea. The general public knows this. We know this. We've had it in writing for 2,500 years. 22. So it warms the middle burner, alleviates vomiting. This means that ginger is going to be useful for nausea and vomiting. It's going to be more useful for nausea and vomiting due to cold and dampness and food stagnation than it is for hot foods. Ginger tea is great if you had a lot of ice cream for alleviating abdominal congestion. It's less good if you had like the 7-pepper spicy Sichuan soup from K-Town. It's not going to do as much good there because you're already hot. In that case, it's more likely to promote vomiting. It'll still alleviate problems in the middle burner, but it's more likely to get them out of you physically.
Peter,
it warms the lung.
With an excess person, that ginger can kind of produce that same effect, like a little, it make them kind of a little too much if their excess tends toward heat.
Yeah, I mean, so as with pretty much everything in this, if we look down at the cautions and contraindications, heat. There you go. There are plenty of excess type patients that we're going to use ginger for, but we're not really going to use it for excess heat. Maybe like a tiny bit to aid in the digestion of the other herbs. So ginger is often used as a corrective assistant. If I have to give you an ice cold formula and it needs to get to your liver, it's got to pass through your spleen and stomach. To get it through your spleen and stomach, I might add small amounts of warming or hot herbs so that you don't just, if I give you too cold of an herbal formula and I need you to digest it, and I don't appropriately modify the formula, you're just going to get diarrhea and it's just going to pass out of you and you won't digest any of it. So ginger is often used in small doses to make formulas that you would otherwise not be able to digest be digestible. So in that case, we might use this for a patient with excess heat, but in very small amounts to make cold herbs okay. But we're not going to, in general, not for heat. Warms the lungs, stops cough. So in this case, anyone want to take a guess as to why this patient would be coughing? What type of cough are we stopping here? It's not yin deficient cough, for example. It's not fluid, it's not dry lung coughing. If you have a patient with dry lungs and you give them ginger, it's likely to make it worse. What sort of things are we talking about here? Feel free to just talk or put it in the chat.
I would say due to external cold, like if it's somebody got a cold.
Yep, nailed it in one, Jonathan. The main thing we're going to be using this for is someone who catches a cold and then ends up with a cough. This is also something we might consider if someone gets a cold, all of their symptoms resolve, and they still have chest tightness and a cough. This pairs well with something like Guizhi for warming the chest, warming the lungs, and stopping coughing. And Liv, you've got the second thing we might use it for, which is a little bit of dampness or phlegm in the lungs. Just because this is warm and acrid, it'll help to move and resolve that. But the main function here is warming. So when you think of fresh ginger, the main thing it's going to do is warm the organs it goes to. It's the main thing it does. And it resolves toxicity. When you see resolves toxicity, that's one of those phrases that needs a little bit more examination depending on the herb. So in this case, resolves toxicity is another corrective assistant function. Just checking Bensky to make sure I'm remembering this correctly. Yes. For quote, for resolving toxicity or treating the effect of overdose of other herbs. Excuse me, such as futsa and banxia, or for seafood poisoning. So we use this with zitsuya for seafood poisoning. And if we're going to be using a toxic herb, we often add, like futsa and banxia, we might add ginger in to keep it from being damaging to the person. So again, a corrective assistant. You guys with me? This making sense? Let me know if any language I use is unfamiliar. I know you guys are still relatively early in the program, and I've switched from like the FCM2 where it's like introduction to language, like, okay, now I expect you to know all of this language. So if any of that's confusing to you, let me know, because it's familiar to me. Dosage is 3 to 9 grams. If you look at traditional formulas and you're using raw herbs, this is usually dosed in slices. Those slices are usually about 1/2 inch wide, and you'll usually see something like 2 or 3 slices, 3 to 5 slices. The same is going to be true for Chinese red dates, where you're going to be talking about number of pieces used. There's no special preparation for this. Some people will say you need to shave off the outside. And in fact, if we look at, let me switch this view over to Bensky here. If we look at Bensky, so Next page, nomenclature and preparation. We have a version of it over here, Sheng Jiang P. The suffix P means peel. As we go through this semester, I'm going to try to highlight pinyin words that tell you parts of plants. So like Gingiberis rhizoma recens, recens means recent, recens means fresh. If you have the last character P, that means peel, like Chen P that you should have learned in Intro to Herbs, tangerine peel. Ginger peel, we're going to use, has a little bit of a cooling function and helps a lot with fluids. Anytime you have peels, it tends to go to the exterior of the body. Not always, but tends to. And in this case, we're going to use ginger peel for edema under the skin. I'm not going to test you on that. So as you go through Bensky, if you're reading these, some of the nomenclature and preparation stuff can be interesting because there's a lot of different ways to prepare these things. So people who are using, for example, ginger, who are juicing ginger regularly, this is the herb that they're taking. Ginger juice is acrid and warm, stronger at dispersing and in settling the stomach than ginger by itself. Best for alleviating nausea and breaking up phlegm. Very commonly used for its anti-nausea effect. It also, not mentioned here, is extra drying. Because it breaks up phlegm, it's also going to break up healthy yin if there's no phlegm to break up. So yin deficient and dry people should generally avoid ginger juice unless it's there to help them digest other things. Make sense? Good. Okay. That's everything about ginger. That's everything about raw ginger. The Ganjiang, the dried ginger, has way more and is actually much more interesting. Standard dosage range. Don't use it if the person has Wei Qi deficiency, yin deficiency, or heat. All of these are cautions. Caution, again, means you should probably make sure you want to do this, and contraindication means you should have special training or else there's absolutely no reason you should be doing this. We go against the cautions moderately regularly. You shouldn't go against any contraindications when you're in school unless your supervisor tells you to. But cautions often are like, just use a little bit, but only sometimes. Like I will totally use ginger with a yin deficient patient if I'm using it to help their digestion with herbs that might tonify their yin deficiency, for example. Okay. Cong Bai. So Cong Bai straddles the line between food and herb. We've got a handful of these things that we'll mention over the semester. Cong Bai is spring onions, scallions, green onions, goes by a number of different names. And this is also going to be fresh. Warm and acrid, lung, stomach, releases the exterior, induces sweating. Kind of, like not really, but a little bit. Disperses cold and unblocks the yang. Kind of. I mean, remember here, we're going to be making a soup out of this, right? So we're going to be brewing this. It's not like you're eating fresh onion, which really might make you sweat. This is taking 3 to 9 grams, so like 1 stalk of green onion, and boiling it for 45 minutes and drinking the contents. Disperses cold and unblocks the yang, very mildly. Resolves toxicity and disperses clumps. Sure, but not very much so. And you don't use it if the person is already sweating profusely due to deficiency. So to that question earlier from Christine about cautions and contraindications, if we come up to Xixin, which is a relatively strong herb, we don't use this with qi or yin deficiency. If we come down to Cong Bai, that's a relatively weak herb, we don't use it if the patient is profusely sweating due to deficiency. That's a few layers stronger in terms of what we're looking for. It doesn't say don't use with deficient patients. It says don't use with really deficient patients who are already sweating a ton. That's one of the ways that you know it's not that strong. That's about all I have to say about this one. I don't find this one very interesting. We use it with an herb called dandocho, which is a type of aged tofu, aged soybean. The two of them together are a traditional soup for like the earliest stages of wind cold. If you think you're getting sick, making a soup out of scallions and aged soybeans can be a nice way to kick it out. It's kind of the Chinese medicine version of chicken soup. But otherwise, we don't really use this. Or I don't see it used very often. Make sense? Any questions about Cong Bai? Okay. Sure, there's no chat. I think we're good. All right. Xiang Ru. So if you guys remember from last week, I said that Bensky organizes the chapters with the first herbs looking like what the chapter's most about, followed by herbs that are kind of what the chapter's about, but with some variations on the theme. And then he gets into assistants and odd herbs, herbs that don't quite fit anywhere. So Xiang Ru, most like herba, has a nickname, which I'm actually just going to put in here. Xiang Ru is called Summertime Ma Huang. Yeah, I just had a moment of like, let me just double check that in Bensky. That is correct. Normally, historically, excuse me, we get wind colds in the winter, we get wind heats in the summer. Xiang Ru is for people who get a wind cold in the summer because for whatever reason, they're engaged in activities that make them cold. So back in the day, this might be someone who's fishing at night in the summer, someone who's mining. There are a lot of different ways that someone might have encountered cold in a natural sort of a sense. For wealthy patrons who had a lot of cooling herbs and cooling beverages. These days, it can be anybody. So this has become, for a while when Ma Huang was really illegal as opposed to kind of in a gray area and not that hard to get. I think my office mate has some sitting around over here. Mostly herba, Xiang Ru was taking the place for Ma Huang in some herbal formulas. It's not quite the same. Slightly warm, acrid, and aromatic, as opposed to warm, acrid, and slightly bitter for Ma Huang. Goes to the lung and stomach, as opposed to the lung and urinary bladder. Again, different, but it induces sweating, releases the exterior, promotes urination, reduces swelling. Those functions are pretty similar. It's doing them in a slightly different way. It's doing this almost all through the lung, as opposed to through both the lung and the urinary bladder. It's gonna be less good within a 6 stages Shanghan Lun sort of a sense, but it can basically do the same things that Ma Huang does. Dosage is fairly standard, and again, profuse sweating due to deficiency is the only real caution. So I want to come over here to part of this is also just showing you how to analyze and learn herbs through action. So I say to you, Xiang Ru is very similar to Ma Huang. So what we do is we go into Bensky and we look in the comparison section. Mostly herba is sometimes called the ephedra of summer because, like Ma Huang, it is acrid, warm, and induces sweating. The difference is that Xiang Ru helps the yang qi to throw off the pathogenic cold, which traps it within, while also harmonizing, cleaning, and transforming dampness. Ma Huang, on the other hand, disperses and disseminates the lung qi to alleviate the cough. So remember, one of the functions of Ma Huang is to stop coughing. Xiang Ru doesn't do that part. Its sweat-inducing and cold dispersing actions are stronger than Xiang Ru, and its mechanism of action is to directly vent the exterior through sweating, rather than assisting the yang qi to throw off or discharge the pathogenic cold. So what they're saying here is that Xiang Ru's function is mostly by stimulating the yang qi of the person's body. Anyone want to take a guess? Well, this might be a little bit more complicated than you guys have got the background for, but let's give it a shot. Based on the organs that these are entering, remember, Ma Huang is going to enter the lung and the urinary bladder. Xiang Ru enters the lung and the stomach. What is going to give you a hint based on lung and stomach that this is going to be affecting yang qi more than simply pushing out at the exterior? And why? Feel free to speak up and just take some guesses. We'll get there. So if these are wind cold 6-stage herbs, then what would the stomach be in terms of the 6 stages?
I mean, Yang Ming, right, would be the stomach. So I guess that's, you know, when the fever is getting a little higher, right, you're getting in the Yang Ming stage. You know, it's like
Yes.
4 bigs territory.
Yep, that's all true. So stomach, most full, the Yang Ming is the most full of qi and blood. In this case,
So it's like we're
figuring out how to do
leveraging
all this at the same time.
like leveraging that like extra qi and blood of the Yang Ming, kind of tapping into that to.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the basic idea here. I'm looking forward to being back in a classroom with a whiteboard. I'm not sure if you guys can tell. So Taiyang, Yang Ming. I'll do this in shorthand so you guys can get used to that as well. Yang Ming. Remember, Taiyang is going to be urinary bladder and small intestine. Yang Ming is going to be stomach and large intestine. We don't have to go further because this is all we're talking about right now. Pathogen comes in. Gets trapped in the Taiyang. If we're using Ma Huang, it's going to go to the urinary bladder and push outwards here. If we're using Xiang Ru, it's going to go to the stomach and push out from deeper inside. Xiang Ru is not going to treat Yang Ming disorder pathogens. Let me draw that line a little bit differently. We have herbs that go to the Yang Ming and push out through the Taiyang. In this case, it's almost more like Xiang Ru is coming like right here and pushing up. It's not really getting involved in the Yang Ming stage. We don't use it really for Yang Ming issues. But if we have a wind cold, we can activate the Yang or stimulate the Yang. And then that will naturally push the cold off the person. This is one of the reasons why, sometimes we'll even use it internally. So this is a little bit closer to Guizhi in some of the functions. It's going to come in and warm the Yang to expel the cold. A little bit similar there, but because of its connection to, so this is all Yang Ming, but then in addition to that, we have the lung and its relationship to skin and Wei Qi. And Xiang Ru is also going to be warming and stimulating. So we're coming from 2 different directions with Xiang Ru. Does that make sense?
Okay. Like just to compare it to something like Guizhi, like, you know, Guizhi has the sweetness and the kind of the warmth that, you know, almost like reigniting like the fire of even the heart, like it's kind of more fire element, like that's kind of how we're looking at Guizhi, kind of like upper jiao, like fire kind of sparking the Yang there. Yeah,
I would say so. I'm sorry, I'm screen sharing. Were you guys able to see the whiteboard there? Okay, good. Yes, so let's see if Bensky does a comparison to, he doesn't compare it to Guizhi. The main difference here is, that Xiang Ru is ultimately going to be draining. We're only going to use it for excess patients, whereas Guizhi we're often using for deficient patients or mixed excess and deficiency, and the sweetness is what clues you into that. Yeah, so well said. They're both going to be working with the Yang, but Xiang Ru is ultimately still going to be draining. If you give someone too much Xiang Ru, they're going to get more tired. They're going to get weaker. If you give someone too much Guizhi, they're going to get a little bit weaker, but they're also going to get hotter and more agitated. That's less true here. This person will get really sweaty, but they're not going to get more agitated. Too much Guizhi, a person's less likely to sleep. Too much Xiang Ru, the person's more likely to sleep excessively. Like Ma Huang has a stimulating effect because of the ephedrine, but once that wears off, same thing. The person will need more rest and rehabilitation and recuperation. Okay. So that's Xiang Ru. Any Xiang Ru questions? Okay.
I have a question. So when this talks about reduces swelling, are we thinking about that more in terms of edema because it's promoting urination and its relationship to the lung, like and fluids?
Yeah, I mean that's what I think. Let me just double check this here, make sure I'm not missing anything. You know, a lot of these have little extra points about them. Yeah, edema, urinary difficulty, especially. So basically the exact same way as Moltings. It's for edema it's for swelling due to lack of urination. Yeah. So once the person urinates, the swelling should go down basically immediately once they begin urinating. Yeah. You'll have patients that come in who seem kind of swollen, who seem like they have a little bit of edema, and they're like, I drink water and I just never pee. Like, okay, well so let's unblock your urination. They start urinating, they lose the edema, they're no longer thirsty all the time, and they drink water and they urinate in a healthy manner. This is usually a fluid physiology issue. So something's blocking the correct movement of fluids. So they have plenty of water in their system, but because it isn't circulating well, it's not doing its job, despite there being an excess of it. You urinate it out, you bring in new fluids, it circulates properly, it resolves the problem. The number of people I've seen who have like a lot of water retention and yet are still thirsty all the time is pretty high. Because that fluid retention doesn't mean that the fluid's properly doing its job. This is gets me to one of my favorite little sayings just to keep in mind for people. Hi, Carlos, good to have you here. I'm just gonna write this in the chat here. I want you all to keep it in the back of your head because I'm gonna reference it. Pathological substances do not perform physiological functions, which is to say, if a person has a ton of extra fluids sitting in their body and they have edema and they have fluid retention, that doesn't mean that they have healthy fluids. That doesn't mean that they're not dry. Because the substances become pathological, that doesn't mean that it means it's not doing its job anymore. This is the same thing with heat. So when we get to a lot of the heat clearing herbs, we're going to talk about examples of times where you might do something like add Sheng Jiang, a ginger, along with a very cold herb, because despite the fact that the person looks like they're on fire, their healthy young qi might be very weak. So we have to support that, despite the fact that we don't want to add heat to their system. Okay. And now we're getting almost done. We only have 2 more herbs in this category. So you guys are already champions. We're getting through the first one here. And now we're into, so I said that often Bensky ends his chapters with things that are like, we got to put this somewhere. And often these are assistants. So both Cang Er Zi, the herb we're about to talk about, and Xin Yi, they're both very useful herbs, but they're the sort of thing that are going to get added in small to moderate dosages as like the 7th or 6th herb in a formula. They're not the big hitters. They're not that important in terms of the major functions of it, but they're helping to clean up some of the little bits and pieces. So in this case, Cang Er Zi, Xanthe fructus, warm, sweet, bitter, toxic. Toxic is telling you right there, be careful about the dosing. If something's actually poisonous, we usually don't say toxic. There's usually a whole bunch of other stuff. We say toxic just means be careful about the dosing. And it goes to the lung, and that's it. And we use this almost exclusively for opening up the nasal passages. So a person who comes in who's got a head cold, who's got sinusitis, who's got a sinus infection, who's got clogged sinuses, who's got a sinus headache, who's got, I mean, you can use this for patients that have, I guess, yeah, it's really more of a Xin Yi thing. So we use Cang Er Zi mostly to open up the nasal passages. It has some dispersing and dispelling functions as well for wind, but that's not really what we use it for. We use it mostly for the nasal passages. Dosage 3 to 9 grams. And if you give someone too much of this, they'll throw up and get diarrhea because it's a little toxic. This is not something where you have to worry about like long-term bioaccumulation of toxicity in the patient. It's not like if the person takes this every day for 10 years, then they're going to die early, because we never give this to a person for that length of time. This is the sort of thing that gets included in small doses a couple times, clear out their nose, and we're good to go. I don't think there's much else that, yeah, so the only comparison that Bensky does is Cang Er Zi to Xin Yi. We just compare the two of them to each other. That's it. I think Cang Er Zi has to be crushed. Maybe not. No, maybe not.
It is kind of like a little pod. So
yep. Oh,
you
yeah.
probably do want to break it open.
Yeah, you want to break it a little bit, but you don't have to like powder it. So this is our second naming thing. If you see Z as the last word, that means seed most of the time. So learning these suffixes, immensely helpful for herb identification. If you see hua at the end, it's most likely a flower. If you say Z, it's most likely a seed. If you see P, it's most likely a peel. We'll keep going through these as we hit them. So Cang Er Zi, little seed. The image in Bensky is actually fairly accurate for once. I mean, I like the images he has. They're just usually of the live plant, which is not super helpful for us. But this is pretty much what it looks like for those of you that don't have your herb ID kit yet. A little spiky seed, usually dry and tan. Yeah, that's about it for Cang Er Zi. We're going to wrap up this next one, and then we'll take a break because we're already at that point. Xin Yi. Xin Yi kind of has two names. You hear it as Xin Yi or Xin Yi Hua. You hear it both ways. And all it does is open the nose. Expels wind cold, unblocks the nasal passages. That's it. That's the whole story. Magnolia floss. This is the, how do you translate floss? This is the, you guys know when you look at a magnolia tree, it has these little seeds that almost look like rabbit's feet that have kind of fine hairs on the outside, almost fur-like. I'll pull up an image for you. Some people here have the herb kits, some don't. This one we do crush. There we go. And this one also has a special preparation note. This is what it looks like. Has a special preparation note, which is you crush it and you add it to a bag and you cook it along with the other herbs that you put in a tea bag, because otherwise these little hairs get everywhere and they might irritate your throat when you drink it. Pretty much anything with fine fibrous hairs or almost like fur, like you see here, is going to be cooked in a tea bag along with the other herbs. So if you order an herbal formula from Camwo, excuse me, and you pick it up and it's got Xin Yi Hua as an ingredient, when you open up your bag of herbs, inside you'll usually see a tea bag that's been heat sealed. And that's what will have the Xin Yi Hua within it. So if I were to ask you which of the herbs, oh yeah, okay, there we go. Wow, that's a beautiful example, Marianne. Yeah, so that's very fresh. Usually you're gonna, so you would take that, you take off the leaves, you would dry the little seeds, and then you'll be able to crush them and you're good to go. There's like a little tiny black seeds within those larger seeds, but use the whole thing once you crush it. Yeah, very nice. And during the time when those are starting to fall off of the trees, if you go to Central Park, you will see a bunch of people from Chinatown collecting large quantities of them. And that's about it. So if I was to ask you which herb from the Warm Acrid Release Exterior category needs to be crushed and put in a bag, I would expect you to know that it's this one. And again, because it has very few functions, this is, let me see if I can, I don't want to spend too much time talking about how to build herbal formulas because that's not very useful for you yet, but I want to give some context so there's less rote memorization. So the way this normally works in terms of actual herbal practice is we take something like patient gets, so diagnosis, wind, cold, Taiyang stage, or wind cold excess, prescription, Ma Huang Tong. This is one of our go-to formulas. Ma Huang Tong has Ma Huang, Gui Zhi, Xing Ren. All of these should be things you learned last semester. Ren tends to mean seed as well. And Gang Cao. Ma Huang, Gui Zhi, Xing Ren, Gang Cao. Yeah, that's all that's in it. If the patient also has an extremely congested nose and a sinus headache, then we might just say, plus Xin Yi, 6 grams. And that's about the only way we ever use this herb. We've already picked our formula, we've already figured out what we're doing, and then we add a little bit of this on the side. That's what we mean by system. Okay? I'm not expecting you to know herbal construction, but I just want you to take this and go, okay, this is something we had a touch of when needed.
Is Ma Huang Tong, is that like a standard like Shang Hanlun formula for Taiyang stage?
Yes, that is the standard Shang Hanlun formula for Taiyang excess, and Gui Zhi Tong is the standard Shang Hanlun formula for Taiyang deficiency.
And yeah, he has like, and he has all those like modifications like kind of built into there, right? Like for all the different other symptoms.
Yeah, so if you go through Bensky's formula and strategies, then after you read each formula, it has standard modifications. If I was teaching formulas, we'd be going over some of that, but what we're doing here by learning single herbs is how to construct formulations from scratch without a textbook if you need to, giving you those building blocks. Okay, that is all of the Warm Acrid Release Exterior category. How are people feeling about that category? Do the differences between these make some sense?
For me, it's like I'm waiting for the herb kit to come tomorrow so I can taste it. So then I maybe can experience something different.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, I'm putting the, oh, that's the PDF. One second, let me find the Word document for this. We're pretty much diving right into, let's take a 10-minute break. I'll find this document while we're taking a break. So it's 7:04, you guys have till 7:15. I really recommend you get up, shake it out a little bit. We're going through a lot of material here, so get a little bit of movement in. I'll be here if you have questions, but I'll be half distracted because I'm also going to be finding a document.
Hey, Peter, it's Kyria. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here, but hey, sorry about all of this. I mean, whatever, it doesn't affect your day necessarily, but I'm here, but just via phone only. So we're kicking it old school.
That's cool with me. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Are you able to see things?
Nope. Just
okay. Well then, check this out. When you get a chance, watch the video as well. Because I've got a whiteboard. There's all sorts of stuff.
I know. I saw the whiteboard. I saw the whiteboard just long enough to see there wasn't a quiz, and then like Zoom was done. So I've actually been driving around coastal Maine to find a Wi-Fi. So I have a spot here. So
okay.
I was going to ask. I know you're looking for a document, but I just wanted to ask you really quickly. Next week will be the herb IDs as well, or will it be kind of? I guess not the herb. Yeah. Will it be the visual IDs as well?
Yeah, I'm still not quite sure how I'm going to do that.
Okay, cool.
If there are herb IDs, then it won't be worth a lot of points yet. But I do want you guys to get practice on them. So I'm going to try to include them, but I also know some people haven't gotten their herbs kits yet. I'm not showing a lot of images of these herbs. I've got some time this weekend to punch up these slides to get pictures of.
All right, cool.
And then we'll be doing more of that. You're welcome.
I just threw the CARE PDF into Slack for you, Peter. And you're muted.
Thanks. You're 2 steps ahead of me. I just have the Slack up to do that. Yeah, sorry, this is a PDF as opposed to a Word document. I'll get the Word document out to you guys shortly. I don't know where that was done on a different computer. This is my clinic laptop. If someone's talking there, you're muted and I can't hear you.
Will it be available on Moodle or?
This is all going to be in the chat each week and it's up on the Slack. I'm not really using the Moodle anymore because it's full of stuff that has nothing to do with this class and I can't change it.
Right, because I'm using my phone, so I don't think I could like download it. I'll try.
Okay, I mean, I don't really know. It's not going to help you very. There's an app for Slack that you can use.
Right, I'm in Slack, so.
Oh, okay, good. And it's here in the chat as well.
Okay.
If that helps, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
For now, ignore the Moodle.
Also, Peter, sorry to be like Jane come lately here, but I don't know what's going on with the Moodle, but I'm wondering, yeah, I guess I'll just watch the recording because I'm just like, what is their deal? Like, why is it giving you such a hard time? And I'm sorry that you guys as teachers have to deal with this extra step. It it just, I imagine it's really frustrating on another level. But
well, I mean, it's the school's actually been pretty supportive, and I appreciate that. The school's been pretty supportive and responsive. Part of the problem with the Moodle is that it is not friendly to people who are teaching a class for the first time and need to adapt. It's very friendly to people who are going to do the exact same thing they did the semester before.
I see.
So my ability to change stuff and update stuff, it's like things get imported, things get changed, and the conversations with the school have like a 2-day lag time back and forth. So if something has to be changed quickly, it just doesn't happen. They've been very nice. We've tried to work together, and we've just gotten to the point where I'm just going to do it not on Moodle.
Yeah, go rogue.
With permission, thankfully, which is nice. I try not to go too rogue in an official capacity without talking to the administration first. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're on assignment. Yeah, no, it makes sense. But I'd be down to like even just handwrite stuff and then send it. I mean, like just get real. I just feel like I'm miswriting in my answers anyway by hand. But anyway, the study tips that you gave me last week have been helping.
Good. So you might have missed this at the beginning. There's now a channel on the Slack called Study Tips. And so if you want to post some of the stuff you've been doing, I just want everyone talking to each other. And I'll come in, I'll chime in, because like I said at the beginning, I know what worked for me. I saw it work for some other people. I saw some things that didn't work for people, but there's many options and people learn differently. So I don't want to be too prescriptive. The more information we get, the better. And you guys should all share your notes for every class, for everything. Like there's no reason not to.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll weigh in on that. Thank you.
Just about ready to start back up. Give me just 1 second. And one other question I got to answer here. Okay, so I'm going to share a different sort of screen here. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay, can you guys see cool acrid herbs and warm acrid herbs right now?
Yes.
Great. So let's do a little compare and contrast, all right?
Was there a Word document for the cool acrid
I
herb?
can't find it right now.
Okay.
I've got it on the wrong computer and it's not uploaded yet. So sorry about that. Please take notes somewhere else and I will email it to you an hour after I leave here and I'm home. And I've got some time set aside to get, all these files are written. I will have all these files up in the Slack tomorrow. I've got an hour set aside for that. Yeah. I'm a little bit more organized than it appears that I am, but a lot going on at once. All right, so let's compare the warm acrid to the cool acrid here. So no surprise, they're going to be the temperatures that they say that they are. The cool acrid ones get colder, then the warm acrid ones get hot. So the warm ones kind of range from slightly warm to warm, most of them being warm. The cool ones range from cool to cold. There's some outliers for these things. I'm not including every option of what you're going to see in these chapters, but in general, for the cool acrid release exterior, they're either cool or cold, and for the warm acrid, they're either warm or slightly warm. They're both going to be acrid, almost always, and they both have quite a bit of bitter and quite a bit of sweet. For the WARE herbs, we're entering the lung and urinary bladder primarily, and for the CARE herbs, we enter lung and then liver and stomach. Anyone want to take a guess as to why we're looking more at liver and stomach and we don't care about urinary bladder anymore?
We're dealing with wind heat rather than wind cold, and it has a kind of a different pathway in.
Yep. So when we're talking about wind heat, we are talking about lung, stomach. When we're talking about wind cold, we're talking about lung, urinary bladder. So recognizing this is probably not something you've heard yet. Okay. A very high quality drawing of a person. Wind cold, enters through the back of the neck. Wind heat, enters through the nose and mouth. Wind heat is going to affect the lungs directly through the throat. Wind cold is going to affect the urinary bladder through the back of the neck, and then the lungs through the skin. Wind heat kind of goes directly more into the organs. From the lung, it moves on to the stomach. From the UV and the lung here, mostly urinary bladder, it's going to move on to Taiyang, which is kind of also the stomach. So when we're looking at the cool acrid release exterior herbs, we're paying more attention to lung, stomach, and we're paying attention to the liver just because the liver gets affected by heat a lot. So oftentimes we're going to see things like, heat on the exterior signs with irritability and liver qi stagnation. That's where that comes in. So here we're looking at different organs because we're looking through a different way in which the pathogen enters the body and a different way that it propagates through the body. This isn't just that the urinary bladder needs more warmth. It's that we're looking at really completely different diagnostic systems because we're describing different entire branches of pathology here. When we're looking at the cool acrid release exterior herbs, we do more things like disperse wind heat. And with the warm acrid, we do more expelling of cold. So the heat has to be dispersed off of the person. The cold has to be expelled. The cold, what does cold do? When cold enters the body, it tightens things up and locks them down. We have to push back against that to get it out of the person's system. When heat comes into the person's body, it speeds things up. Oh, thanks, Carlos. Great, we'll let you know. When heat enters the body, it affects the tissues and invades them directly, and we have to disperse it back outwards. It's a somewhat different mechanism. You'll see that with the heat pathogens, we tend to already have sweating. So we're not releasing the exterior promoting sweating. Cold is going to lock down the exterior. Part of the releasing function is the re-establishing of proper sweating, proper fluid physiology. With heat, the person's already sweating. We need to disperse the heat off of them. Once the heat is dispersed, they return to normal. We're going to see the phrase benefit the throat repeated quite a few times. This is because heat invades through the mouth and nose and into the throat. The first symptom of a wind cold, tightness on the back of the neck. First symptom of wind heat, scratchy, painful throat. We're also going to see a lot of things that clear and benefit the eyes or nose or head or throat. That's because ultimately with the wind heat invading through the mouth, it can affect all of the things around here in the throat, mouth, nose, eyes, head in general. It's also going to be affecting the eyes through the liver. We're going to be venting quite a few rashes. Oftentimes that's a way of getting the heat out. The person gets a wind heat, they get a sudden rash. They're like, I got a scratchy throat. And then I just broke out in red splotchy hives all over my upper chest or in my armpits or in the crook of my elbows and knees. Where we give them these herbs, often the rashes get worse for 12 hours, 24 hours, and then all better. And the last one is soothe the liver because wind heat makes people grumpy. Our doses here are a little bit higher. So here we're around 3 to 9 grams for most of these herbs, fairly standard dosage range. And here it's more 3 to 12. On these, we're mostly worried about heat and about deficiency. Here, we're still concerned with deficiency, but we don't care about heat. And some of these will mention things like internal cold. That's our basic compare and contrast. The thing to keep in mind is this isn't the same disease, one hot, one cold. These are completely different types of diseases that people can get. Completely different disease categories. Yes, one's hot and one's cold, but they also have different methods of propagation and invasion. So let's switch over to just this one. Oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. I also don't really want to show two of these at once. There we go. Okay. So first one should be familiar. You guys learned this in Intro to Herbs, right? Bo He, Mentha Hapacalycis herba. It's mint. It's Chinese mint. There's a whole bunch of mints. The mint family is massive. There's like 500 types of culinary mint. So this is a somewhat specific type. You can't just substitute any old mint for this. It's not that it's especially amazing. It's that each different mint from a different continent is going to have a somewhat different function. They're all ballpark the same, but there are some differences. Cool, acrid, and aromatic. Anytime you see an herb that's a leaf that's aromatic, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that's probably reflecting some amount of volatile oils that are in the leaf, that are in the herb, which means you need to get this, yes, dried, but relatively freshly dried or well preserved. If I buy Bo He and I sit on it for 5 years in my office, it's not going to do a whole lot when I try to use it. It's not going to have a lot of smell. Those aromatic compounds are going to have evaporated. We'll get to that a little bit more when we talk about preparation for Bo He. Cool, acrid, aromatic enters the lung and the liver, like a lot of what in this chapter is going to do. Disperses wind heat, clears and benefits the head, eyes, and throat, because that's what wind heat affects. So what it's saying here is something along the lines of Person gets wind heat that invades through the throat. This is going to be kind of gently pushing and dispersing out to the entire face and mouth area. One of the things that happens if you have a strong mint drink, like a strong boha tea, you get this kind of like, as you're exhaling, it feels cooling. There's a cooling sensation through your mouth and throat, just as a product of the mint. That sensation lines up fairly closely with the actual functions of the herb. Boha is going to help to vent rashes. It's not that great at it, but it does do it a little bit. And when we say vent rashes here, we're mostly talking about rashes due to wind heat. So, yeah, that's all that Penske has to say about it too. Allows constrained liver qi to flow through freely. If you have a friend who's grumpy and excess and tends to be hot, recommending that they have a cup of mint tea in the evenings to help relax can be surprisingly effective. It helps the liver qi to flow freely. I found this to be useful working in restaurants. You know, a little bit of mint tea with chrysanthemum in it. You can dose them up fairly high if you're strong enough to take a little bit of draining. The draining can be beneficial. So it has a regulating liver qi function. Anything you see in parentheses, that's me. I don't expect you to have that phrase on the test. But Penske occasionally chooses odd phrasing. So he says, allows constrained liver qi to flow freely. It regulates liver qi. That's what it does. I'll answer that once I finish this herb, Marianne. And the last one is expels turbid filth. So that's for problems such as summertime exposure to unclean qi, leading to summer heat gastric disturbance with abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and a thick, greasy yellow tongue coating. So what this herb is doing is it's helping to, when someone gets to a point where their fluid physiology is completely dysregulated due to summer heat, due to something that resembles heat stroke in a humid environment, mint can help to unblock the channels, promote urination, and get that turbidity out of them. Turbid filth is actually a fairly accurate way of describing this. It's just not very useful. What we really mean are useless, kind of toxic fluids that are gumming up the works, that are there because the person's not able to urinate them out or defecate them out. This just helps to remove this turbidity from their system. You see this in people who, usually due to exposure to the elements, are throwing up and heavily nauseated. And you also see, you see this in culinary settings where things like watermelon salad often have mint in them. Mint, cucumber, watermelon salad is perfect for expelling turbid filth. That doesn't mean it's a cleanse within a standard cultural context, but it's beneficial for expelling turbid filth. Dosage is 3 to 6 grams. It's a little low. I would consider that as, in my head, this is more like 3 to 12 grams, but sure. And we don't want to use it if and almost only if the liver qi is flowing too freely. That's what we're concerned about here. If the person's liver yin is already unrooted, if their liver qi is already unrooted because of liver yin deficiency, if their yang is rising, then this might make that worse. So we're not going to be using this with old people, unless there's a good reason. Okay, there's a question in the chat about how do you measure out herbs? A scale, use a scale. That's it. If you have the space, which you probably don't in New York, it's nice to get a big table scale. One with sliders that you can adjust. The digital scales are fine, but they're not ideal. And at least for a few years, you should measure out every bag very accurately. And that's about it. Yep. Realistically, though, you're probably not going to be measuring a ton of herbs. You're probably, you're going to for playing around and for learning herbs. And if you make your own products, like my office mate here has some long soaking alcoholic herb combos. I've got all sorts of herbs sitting around. You know, acupuncturists just accumulate these things. So for those things, you're going to be measuring them out yourself. But when it comes to patients, the chances of you having a raw herbal pharmacy are quite low. It's just very expensive to keep them. It's a full-time job. So most of the time, what you're going to be doing is prescribing and then trusting that a place like Chem will make it correctly, which they usually do. Sufficiently usually do to make me not worried.
So Peter, my question, I mean, for single herbs mostly, I mean, I wouldn't be creating the concoctions myself. I would rely on Camwo or something similar, someplace similar, but 3 to 6 grams, and you know, I'm not European, so I'm not on that system. So I talk in like cups and ounces. And so if I wanted to do like a single herb, just let's say it's like personal, and I know I'm familiar with some herbs, like what is 3 to 6 grams look like? Is it like
well, so it depends very heavily on the herb, what it looks like. So let's take Chan Tui. Did you guys learn Chan Tui in Intro to Herbs? Cicada casings?
No.
No, okay. So Chan Tui, which actually I think that might be our next herb, 2 herbs. Yeah, 2 herbs from now, are the moltings of the cicada. So it's basically insect shells. They're paper thin, they weigh nothing. So, and they're dosed relatively high. So it says 3 to 9 grams, but it's more like 15 or 20. 15 grams of Chan Tui is like this much Chan Tui. It's a lot. Like an entire one of these cups full is going to be less than 15 grams. Similar for Bo He because it's a leaf, it's airy. But if we're talking about Niu Bang Zi, if we're talking about a seed, that's going to be different. So it depends on, like, if what you're saying is like visually, how much is that? It's going to depend a lot on what part of the plant we're talking about. And this is one of the reasons why we weigh them. And we do these things by weight. Yeah, I think that's about as good of an answer as I can give you there.
No, that helps.
So, and also they come in different cuts. Like sometimes you'll get Bo He and it's cut up into strips because in theory, maybe you want to increase surface area. Yeah, so it depends a bit. Last thing about Bo He, I'm surprised this isn't in my notes, so I'm double checking to make sure that I'm not doing something stupid. Just checking the methods and preparation here. Okay, I guess mint is not one of the ones where we do this. So there's quite a few herbs that are aromatic that we short cook, where we add these in the last 5 minutes of preparation. Apparently mint is not one of those. I thought it was. Never mind. Okay. That's everything we got from mint. Niu Bang Zi. This is that's an autocorrect. I've done my best to get the names right as I've copied these over, but occasionally I might find errors. So Niu Bang Zi is not Arctic fructus. It is, and it's in the chat, Arcti with 2 I's. So replace that C with an I. And despite us being in the Cool Acrid Release Exterior chapter, this herb is cold. It's cold, acrid, and bitter. Goes to the lung and stomach. So we're already familiar with the mechanism that we're working with here, right? Same idea we were talking about on the whiteboard. The avenue for entrance of the wind heat, a little bit of the digestive system, but also the next stage, the next level. Disperses wind heat, benefits the throat. We're going to see that quite a few times this semester, or this chapter. Resolves toxicity and vents rashes, and moistens the intestines. Resolves toxicity and vents rashes for Niu Bang Zi is going to be for red swellings, carbuncles, mumps. We don't really see a lot of those. What we do see are, I'll copy this and put it in the chat. This is out of Bensky. For maculopapular rashes due to fever. So someone gets a fever and they start getting hives or rashes. We use this. There's a number of herbs we use. This is one of the herbs we use to vent that heat out. We're going to get over to some other categories like clear heat drain toxicity, where we might want to drain that heat out of the person. This is when we want to push the rash out of them as opposed to drain it out. Also used for pruritic rashes due to wind heat. So if the patient gets red skin due to heat, this is a good herb to use. When we say moisten the intestines, we're mostly just saying that this herb's kind of oily. That's the main thing that we mean. A lot of seeds have a function of moistening the intestines. So, okay, why do we care about the fact that it moistens the intestines? Anyone want to take a guess at why a wind heat could make us want to moisten the intestines?
Constipation? Causes
How
constipation.
does a wind heat give us constipation?
Dries you out.
Okay, keep going. So large intestine gets dried out. Why does a wind heat dry out the large intestine? I mean, it's hot, heat dries, but why does the wind heat do it? Give me the steps as best as you can.
Enters through the lung, the paired organ to the large intestine, and that just slows everything down.
Yeah, you got it. So the heat comes in through the mouth, enters the lung and the large intestine transmit, paired organs transmit pathology back and forth. The wind heat's in the lungs, where the heat's starting to dry out the lungs. That's one of the first things that happens. So you get a wind cold, you get this cough. It's more of a kind of like a sort of a cough. With wind heat, it's more of a there's this dryness. It's like a smoker's cough without phlegm because the heat has been cooking off the fluids. Often those people will cough, and there's nothing to cough up because they're just dried out. That heat also can, not always, but can also dry out the intestines. So if we have a patient who comes in who has a wind heat invasion, itchy, scratchy, painful throat, their voice might even be a little bit weak from the heat drying out the lungs and the throat. And in addition to that, they've got a little bit of a rash, let's say even better, rash on lung 5 in their elbows, and they've got constipation with dry stools that burn a little bit when they try to pass them. It's like, you just gave me the entire list of things we use this herb for. So well done, good guessing. We dose this one up a little bit and we grind it. And the cautions and contraindications for this herb are, don't use it unless you have a reason to. Why would you use this for things that it doesn't do? A lot of the cautions and contraindications, like this one, are, let me see exactly what Pensky says. Use with caution in cases of qi deficiency, diarrhea, or in the absence of heat, because it's cold and slippery. Yeah, so don't use it if you don't want to. If a cold herb is inappropriate, probably don't use this cold herb, is basically what they're saying. This gets us to the quality of slippery. Slippery usually means that the herb itself is oily or greasy or contains oils. So coffee would be slippery, for example. And it usually means it unblocks the bowels or moistens the intestines. We're going to use herbs like homarin, cannabis semen, cannabis seeds, for elderly people with dry constipation, quite a bit. There's no psychoactive qualities, but there's a lot of oil in hemp seeds. So we crush it up, we cook it, they drink the fluids, and it helps to gently moisten the intestines. That'll be one of the last herbs we cover this semester. Yeah, and grind this. So also, anytime you see grind an herb before decocting, what does grinding do? Like on a mechanical level, why do we care about grinding? Anybody?
Just breaks it down so the body has access to it. I don't know, if the seed, if it's a shell, the body can't get to it.
Well, we're not eating it. Keep in mind, we're going to strain these things out. So we're just cooking it into water.
Just to really...
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you're like 90% of the way there. We want the most surface area possible. Yes, exactly. Okay. It's surface area. So we grind it so that we have increased surface area so that we can get everything we want out of it. Grind usually doesn't mean powder. It just means break it up fairly fine. The larger, so when you guys learned Ban Xia in Intro to Herbs, it's a great example of an herb that's like a wonderful herb, but it doesn't have a lot of surface area. They're kind of large and round, medium sized and round. You break them up, you get much more out of them. That's the fun thing.
I have one question about Niu Bang Zi. So a friend of mine, she has chronic tonsillitis, and the doctor prescribed, a lot of formulas with Niu Bang Zi. So whenever she drinks one with this ingredient, she just throw up all the time. So is there a reason why it will cause that?
She throws up?
Yeah, if the formula has this.
There can be a couple different reasons. If someone's throwing up or having a negative digestive reaction to an herb, there are a couple things to consider. The first thing that's always worth considering is, are they just allergic to this? Like, is this an individual thing? They might just not get along with it well.
Okay.
So let's see here. Toxicity. Allergic reactions have been reported, including discomfort in the chest, rapid breathing, sensation of obstruction in the throat, dizziness, flushing in the face. He says dizziness twice, vomiting. So there are reports of people vomiting from this. Rashes, itching, low blood pressure. Don't let that scare you. Everything has somebody that's allergic to it. Everything has, you can find people allergic to stuff. So that's not particularly concerning. Oh, I haven't been seeing the chat. Oh, Hava did tell you short cook for boho. Good, that's what I thought. Good. So first thing, maybe they're just allergic. Maybe they just have a bad reaction. Maybe you just need to swap out the herb. The second question is it because they can't handle the cold? So this is where I would think to myself with this patient, first off, I would think about whether or not this is appropriate for the patient. If you give a patient an herbal formula and the first thing they do is throw up, your first thought, especially when you're new at this, your first thought should be, did I make a mistake? Like, is this the wrong formula? Like, is their body just rejecting this right out of the gate? Excessively cold formulas cause people to throw up. If they don't throw up, then they get diarrhea. If they're not balanced properly, one of those two things frequently happens. Same with bitter herbs. This one's not, I mean, I don't think this one tastes particularly bad, but it is listed as bitter. So excessively bitter herbs often make people throw up. What I would do, I mean, I don't know your friend, so I don't want to give like individualized advice. If I wrote myself an herbal formula and it had Niu Bang Zi in it and I threw up, and then a month later I wrote myself a completely different herbal formula and the only thing that was the same was Niu Bang Zi and I threw up, I would take one piece of Niu Bang Zi and chew on it and see what happened, absent from everything else to try to isolate it. I would also consider taking another very cold herb in a low dose and seeing what happened.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
because she
I
had
also.
me, so.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I said she just happened to tell me about Niu Bang Zi yesterday, so I thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Yeah. Chronic tonsillitis is an interesting condition. Funny enough, I really like using topical herbs on it. We've got these sprays and powders that you can just put right onto the tonsils. That can be really effective. So you can use dosages and intensities of herbs that are way higher than the person could digest if you wanted to treat them, if you wanted to have them drink it and then have it go through their system and get to their tonsils. There's no way you could get some of these herbs through that process. But you can use a 1/4 gram of some of these powders and just get it locally onto the tonsils, and it can help out. I would talk to a clinic supervisor. Have her come into the clinic.
Okay.
Talk to a clinic if you want to. This is one of those like, I don't know. Let's see.
He has been dealing with it for 7 months, 6 months. Started from a wind heat, cold invasion. So I'll ask. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. I mean, I recommend you guys recruit patients to see them in the clinic. That's a good way to work with them.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. All right, so I think we're going to just double check our timing here, since these things keep changing. Yeah, so we're going to, I guess, 8:35. Okay, so we got time. I guess we'll take another break in a minute. Yeah. All right. So you guys let me know if I'm messing something up on the time, because this 2-hour thing is 2.5-hour thing is a little different. So let me know if you're like, please, we need a break. All right. So next herb is wrong screen. Next herb we're going to cover is Chun Tui, the cicada casing. This is a pretty cool herb. I like this herb. That's still the wrong screen. I don't know why. Occasionally Zoom will not share what I ask it to share. Still sharing this. Give that one more try. There we go. Okay. So Chun Tui, Cicada periostracum. Interesting herb. So slightly cold, sweet, and salty. So we're not acrid here. There's no acridity. That's not one of the functions we have. Almost all animal products are sweet and salty. They can also be other things in addition to that, but the vast majority of them are sweet and salty. In addition, so slightly cold, sweet, salty, so we're way off book for what this chapter is normally about. Enters the lung and the liver, which is normal for this chapter. Disperses wind and clears heat. Not very well. It's not great at that, but it does do it. Let's see here. Is this where Bensky gives the real function for this? Yes, this is. Okay, so disperses wind and clear heat. Not really. This is usually going to be a deputy. So you might have mint as the main herb, even mint and Niu Bang Zi as the main herbs for getting the wind heat out of the person, for dispersing it. And you add Chun Tui if you want to help disperse the wind, especially if there's also a rash or if there's an eye problem. But you use Chun Tui when the wind heat is causing the person to lose their voice or have vocal problems. That's the main thing. That's the claim to fame for Chun Tui. And this is one of these things that Chinese medicine has quite a few herbs whose function is related to what the animal or plant does. So cicadas are loud, therefore their casings are good for loss of voice. My personal theory is that this way of thinking is a terrible way to go about thinking about herbs, but it's a great way to remember what some herbs do. And back in the day, there was a lot of testing of herbs, and some of these things worked out well. So cicada casings, loss of voice due to wind heat. Every now and then you'll have a patient who's like, I got sick a couple days ago and I just can't talk now. Cicada casing, that's what you're thinking of, if it's a wind heat. So it disperses wind and clears heat for patterns of externally contracted wind heat, especially with loss of voice and swollen sore throat. That's the main thing it does. Because it's entering the liver, it's also going to help with any sort of eye problems here. So if the person gets a wind heat and their eyes are also red and itchy and hot, then this is even more recommended. Remove superficial visual obstruction. Sometimes when people get a bit of a fever, their vision just gets a little blurry. It's like everything's a little out of focus. This helps with that. That's because this heat in the liver is almost steaming up to the eyes, the associated organ. As we cool down the liver, that clouding disappears. So it's not because it magically helps the eyes, it's that it goes to the liver and it's kind of cold. And it has and because of its lightness, it tends to affect the upper body, so it helps a lot with the associated organs. Fence rashes.
Yeah, quick question about this herb. Does it it just makes me think of people that I know that are smokers, that are frequent smokers. Would this be something that that dryness that would come from like smoking and the wind heat that from the exterior of the smoke? Could that be considered?
Usually no. We might add a little bit of this in, but and we're going to cover a ton of stuff that's going to be good for smokers in a couple weeks. But smoking isn't really a wind heat invasion. It's more of a toxic heat accumulation. Smoking is, the smoke itself does come from the outside world, but it's really more of an internally generated disease. So we're not dispersing the heat from smoking. We often have to drain it or get it out through other mechanisms. But yeah, we'll be going over. I used to be a smoker. Herbs have helped a lot. We'll go over a bunch of stuff to help with smokers.
All right, cool. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yep, for sure. I mean, if you want to get your smoker friends to just like start chewing on cicada casings, like that could be a fun prank. You're not going to hurt them, but it's not going to help them a ton either.
To crush it up into something and then have them smoke it like that, or
I'm not going to advocate smoking it, but
no,
I mean,
I would
people
never
have done
do that.
worse. Okay, vents rashes. So same sort of idea. This isn't really one of our go-tos for this. It's nice, but this is not a heavy lifter for rashes. This is a great herb. This is the go-to herb for loss of voice due to wind heat. That's really what I want you to know about it. And it helps with problems in the eyes. So yeah, clears the eyes, removes superficial visual obstruction for wind heat eye problems such as red, painful, swollen eyes, or blurry vision. Yeah. And then the last one is stops spasms and extinguishes wind. Yes, but it's not the heavy lifter. So it says here for child, I'll share this one because this is the first like, oh wait, really? We're treating that level of serious thing that we're gonna do. So we're over here, stop spasm and extinguish wind for childhood febrile diseases, childhood diseases with a high fever, in which wind causes convulsions, spasms, delirium, or night terrors. So basically they're saying a fever high enough in a child that they're having convulsions and hallucinations. Also, you can use it to help tetanus. Don't try to treat tetanus, send them to a doctor. If you're in some situation where you're treating someone who has a fever that's high enough that they are having convulsions and night terrors, they should go to a doctor, a Western medical doctor. That being said, we have a long tradition of treating this in Chinese medicine as well. And I'll answer that in a second, Jonathan. And in this case, yeah, Chan Tui is nice, but you're starting off with scorpion and following that up with you're starting with really strong herbs, and then you're adding a little bit of this in. This is not our heavy lifter for this level of disease. Jonathan is asking in the chat, I don't use animal products as food or medicine unless they're kosher. Is there a good way to go around? What do you do about this? That's a great question. I rarely use animal products in what I prescribe, so I don't actually know. And what I'm going to do is email Tom Leung, the guy who runs Camwo, right after class today, and I will get you an answer. Good question. Yeah, there is an answer to that. There are kosher herbs. I just don't know how to go about interacting with them. You also can usually get around using animal products. So even if the answer is that they're prohibitively expensive or hard to get, it doesn't mean that's not going to be a major problem for being an herbalist. Okay. So that's Chan Tui. So Chan Tui, really good for loss of voice due to wind heat. It's not used for loss of voice. So like right now, my voice is a little bit scratchy because this is like hour 8, hour 9 of me talking today. Chan Tui is not the correct herb for me because this is internally generated from overuse of lung qi. When you talk, when you cough, you use lung qi. It's consistently using it. And if you use enough lung qi, then you begin to damage the lung fluids. So I'm just beginning to damage the fluids in my lung a little bit. We use tonifying herbs for that. Chan Tui, well, while it is sweet, isn't really a tonifying herb. In this case, the person's losing their voice because the heat is drying out the area locally. If you get rid of the heat, the fluids come back naturally, like that. If, on the other hand, you're damaging the fluids because you're consistently using them up for an extended period of time, they don't come back as quickly. It's like the difference between, oh, it's too late in the day for metaphors. If I'm consistently using my lung qi, I'm depleting a reservoir. In this case with Chan Tui, it's more like there's a little pocket where there's a problem, and overall the person's fluids are probably fine. That distinction makes sense? Nod if the answer is yes, please. Okay, good. Got some nods. Thank you. It also says here, according to Bensky, don't use this with for pregnant patients. The reality is this is an extremely safe herb. There's some, what he says with this one's almost a little silly. Let me get the exact wording. Yeah, many pre-modern materia medica texts record the use of this substance for delayed labor and to promote the expulsion of the residue of the birth process. It should therefore be used with caution in patients who might be pregnant, especially if they have a history of miscarriage. That's true. However, you shouldn't be giving any herbs to a patient who has a history of miscarriage unless you're specifically trained in what to do about that. So there's a caution for this of like, don't give it to women who have had a bunch of miscarriages, but really we're taking that a step further, which is that's a specialty. In the same way that we're going to see some herbs that are like, be careful giving this to cancer patients. It's like, how about don't give herbs to cancer patients unless you've trained in herbal oncology? That make sense? Let's do a 10-minute break now because after all this talk about losing my voice, I feel like I'm losing it. And we'll come back and we'll do another 20 minutes and we'll be done for tonight. How's that sound? That fit with everyone? That looks right. Okay, great. 10 minutes. Shake it out. All right, everybody back? Let's get through a few more of these and we'll stop at about 8:30, 8:35. So the next herb we're covering is Xiang Yi, Morifolium. And while we're already a few herbs into this chapter, and we already talked about Chan Tui, which is kind of something you add on to things, I think of Morifolium, I think of Xiang Yi as one of the heaviest hitting herbs in this chapter. We use this herb very regularly for wind heat invasions. This is a common herb, commonly used herb. We use it in that dosage and we go a bit higher as well. So maybe a little asterisk that in your future you might use more. It's cold, it's sweet and bitter, goes to the lung and the liver. I don't really see this herb having a particular, no, that's not true. We'll get to that in a minute. So goes to channels we expect, has flavors we expect, except that it's not acrid, it's sweet instead. Xiang Yi disperses and scatters wind heat. That's the first function. And that's the main thing we use it for. That's what this chapter is, in theory, mostly about, though we do a whole lot of other things around here too. So when we say that it disperses wind heat, we mean for externally contracted wind heat with fever, headache, sore throat, and coughing. That's exactly what a wind heat invasion looks like. So this is standard middle of the road wind heat. Calms the liver and clears the eyes. Yeah, because when you've got this heat in the system, it tends to affect the liver. Once the liver has some heat in it, it tends to manifest in the eyes. So we're going to see the same thing for eye problems due to liver heat from excess wind heat. And interestingly, we can use this as well for eye problems due to liver yin deficiency causing heat. So this one, if normally we do cautions and contraindications last, but take a look at them. We don't really have any for this herb. Though I point out that it is cold and bitter, so mind the person's digestion. And by none, we mean, yeah, why not use it in a deficient patient? It doesn't really matter. If they're liver yin deficient, we normally would avoid moving herbs or draining herbs. In this case, it's kind of okay. Clears the lungs and moistens dryness. So it gets the heat out of the lungs and it helps to regenerate fluids. This is especially good for people who have wind heat and they get a cough, but the cough doesn't produce much mucus because it's too dry. So you got, I'm sure people here have had that feeling of like coughing and coughing. It's like, I can feel that phlegm in there. That like sort of a feeling of trying to get that phlegm to come up and out. If it then does come out and it's really sticky, almost like half like grossly sticky, and it's a little yellow, then it probably would have been a good idea to be using Xiang Yi about a day earlier. This is the herb. This is one of the herbs we're going to go to for heat cooking down the fluids in the lungs and resulting in this sticky, thick phlegm. Kyria, to your question earlier, this herb shows up in smoker's cough formulas. It's not one of our heaviest hitters for that, but it shows up for that.
Cool, thank you, note it.
The last function is that it cools the blood and stops bleeding. Not really. This is not one of our go-tos for that. We have a cool blood stop bleeding category. This herb is not in that category. This herb is not in that category because it's mildly helpful with that. If a person has heat in the blood that's causing them to bleed, especially if that is related to the lung or the liver or to the digestive system, then we might include this herb as an assistant for the rest of the formula, but we're not designing a formula around this for that function. You guys are probably picking up at this point that so we described the chapters in Bensky. I need to make a note that I need to say this next time I teach this class. Sorry, just 1 second. going to be a bit of this semester as I'm updating it for semester 2. So when we look at the functions of each individual herb, it's usually that the first function is what we use it for the most. The second, we use it for less. The third, we use it as an assistant. And the fourth, and from there on, it's all things that it assists with, but that it's not a heavy hitter for. So we might use this as a chief, as the main herb in a formula, if we're looking to disperse and scatter wind heat. But if we're looking to clear the lungs and moisten dryness, this is going to be the fourth or fifth herb in the formula. You guys with me? That makes sense? It's generally true for the order of herb functions. That's the functions are chosen. The order of the functions are for a reason. And that's most of Sheng Jiang. It gets used a lot. So when we went over wind heat herbs, I mentioned that Feng Feng and Jing Zi get used together a lot. Sheng Jiang gets used with Juhua, with chrysanthemum. In fact, we have a formula called Feng Zhu Yin that's used for wind heat invasions. Our main herbal formula for wind heat invasions is called Yin Chao San. Don't worry about that. We have another one called Feng Zhu Yin. We get the Song from Sheng Jiang, and we get the Zhu from Juhua.
Peter, can you just mention that again? You were saying like last week you mentioned the was it Dui Yao pairs?
Dui Yao.
Can you Dui Yao? What does that mean again? I mean, obviously it means they're pair, but what does that translate to?
I think it just translates to herb pairs. I'm suddenly wondering what it translates to in my head. They're basically herbs that fit together really nicely. So sometimes that means that one corrects for the other one. Sometimes that just means they play really well together. Sometimes that means that between the two, we get kind of a super herb. And in this case, it means we get a little bit of a super herb from the two of them together.
Okay, cool. And this one, the one that we're speaking about now, pairs nicely with, I just missed the name.
Yeah, Sheng Jiang and Juhua go together nicely. And Juhua is chrysanthemum flower.
Okay.
This herb is dirt cheap. You can buy it by the pound in Chinatown for like $6-7 a lot of the time. Like organic, high quality, you're still under $20. Because it's a little flower, a pound is like this much of it. It takes a long time to go through. This is traditionally called the poet's herb. It's really nice for gently relieving constraint. I mentioned earlier that, brain fart. When we were talking about mint, I mentioned that this is nice for allowing constrained liver qi to flow freely. Well, I mentioned that it does that nicely when it's paired with Juhua, with chrysanthemum, which has a function of calming the liver. So if you have people who tend to get irritable easily, having them drink chrysanthemum tea regularly can be helpful. It helps to just gently relieve constraint. It's a calming herb. So this would be somewhat similar to something like chamomile. Disperse it without the digestive functions that chamomile has. So disperses wind and clears heat, yes, but slightly differently than how Sheng Jiang does. So Sheng Jiang is doing this for externally contracted wind heat, etc. And Juhua is doing it for wind heat patterns, but also for some internal heat. In fact, in Bensky, I didn't realize this. I didn't prep enough to notice that. When we look at the actions and indications for chrysanthemum and Bensky, for the first function, it says usually with Sheng Jiang, as in Feng Zhu Yin. So they go together very nicely for any sort of external heat.
Peter?
But second to that, we do also use Juhua for internal heat issues. Calms the liver and clears the eyes for red, swollen, dry, or painful eyes due to wind heat, or due to liver yang, or due to liver and kidney yin deficiency. So this is across the board a useful herb for the eyes if you have a liver condition. So you might want to put in your head, chrysanthemum flowers calms the liver, good for wind heat, beneficial for the eyes. You guys learned goji berries last semester, right? An intro to herbs? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes, great. Gochitsa and Juhua get used together to benefit the eyes as well. That's a common duiyao, common herb pair for benefiting the eyes. Goji berries with chrysanthemum. Also, actually tastes good, which is a plus when it comes to herbs.
Peter?
Yeah.
It's Marianne. Regarding chrysanthemum, you had mentioned chamomile.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me think about it's in the ragweed family, and we're in herbology, Chinese medicine, traditional medicine. But if we can just kind of think about Western for a bit, in clinic my last term, there was she was a student, but she was as a patient, and she had some wind heat and used chrysanthemum, and it actually aggravated her rash throughout her body. And I know because I have a family member who is allergic to ragweed, and so chamomile makes her symptoms worse. And I don't see any kind of contraindications here regarding that in that family of herbs.
So for that sort of contraindication, we go down in each one to, so in the organization of, first off, chamomile is an internal herb and should not be used for wind heat. That's the first thing. Second, the overlapping function between Juhua and chamomile is mostly in relation to the liver and to stress. So chamomile is also really helpful for digestion in some cases. Juhua doesn't really do much for digestion unless it's liver overacting on spleen. Juhua gets used for external conditions. Chamomile's not necessarily helpful. It can be a little beneficial, but I don't recommend it for that. I'm also not an expert in Western herbalism, so I've picked up a bit, but I'm a specialist in Chinese herbalism. So we have the standard cautions and contraindications, but most herbs are going to say something like see toxicity below. And so if we scroll down, we're going to have two different things: traditional contraindications, which is the text that this actually came from, and then toxicity. So toxicity, allergic reactions have been reported following skin contact with the herb, including pruritus, inflammation of the skin, burning sensation, edema, and erosions. So terrible. Mild allergic skin reactions may appear following ingestion of the herb. So that sounds like exactly what you said, right? Yeah. The reality in my experience is that I talk to patients about whether or not they have a lot of allergic reactions. Usually patients know if allergies are something that they have to be aware of or not. And if the patient's like, I don't really have allergies, I just don't think about this. Like I, as a clinician, just don't think about most of the toxicity stuff having to do with allergies. If a patient has frequent allergic reactions, then I often am going to try to stick more to dietary therapy unless there's a good reason not to. I don't really want to give someone a large dose of an herb that contains chemical compounds that they might be allergic to. Yeah, and I'm there. But that being said, there are also people who are allergy specialists who use a lot of herbs. That's not one of the things I do. The traditional contraindications, don't get too hung up on them if you read them, because sometimes they're a little confusing. But yeah, that help?
Thank you.
It's important to point out at this stage, so we've basically covered what chrysanthemum does. Release toxicity, it's a useful toxin healing herb. So people with slow healing sores or inflammation, it can just be beneficial for injury healing. It's also useful for liver yang, causing wind. So here, calms the liver, extinguishes wind. We're talking more about people who have things like Parkinson's, older people who begin to get tremors, especially if those tremors are worse at night, or people who have things like transient serious tinnitus, especially if it's worse at night. This is, yeah, ascendant liver yang. But kind of fits as well in the general feeling of this is just a nice calming herb that can be used by basically everybody unless they're allergic. The one other thing to point out, we have multiple types of chrysanthemum. If you say Zhuhua, you're going to get exactly what we just described. But there's also white chrysanthemum, yellow chrysanthemum, and sweet chrysanthemum, and wild chrysanthemum. And these all do slightly different things. Dry fried chrysanthemum flowers, charred chrysanthemum. A lot of herbs have different preparations. This one has an especially large amount. Generally, we just use the normal Zhuhua, but in some conditions, we'll kind of step it up and use these sorts of things. So the white one, more stronger at calming the liver and clearing the eyes. And so that's the one we're going to use if we're trying to nourish the eyes with gochita, for example. And the yellow one is better, is more bitter and better at getting rid of fire and toxicity. So this is often what we'll see is an herb that has multiple functions. Well, there's also multiple varieties, and we'll choose one variety over another if we want to emphasize one function. This is getting more specialized. For now, Zhuhua. And just keep in mind that some of these have multiple varieties. But you just say Zhuhua, you get the one that kind of does it all. Okay. Still do that. Any questions about Zhuhua? Chrysanthemum? This is a nice one to just try by itself. You know, just make chrysanthemum tea in the evening for yourself and sit with it a little bit. See how you feel. It's not dangerous. It's easy. And see if you notice some of the calming functions. See if you notice, especially if you've had floaters in your vision or things like that. Just chrysanthemum goji berry tea. Drink it for 2 weeks. See what happens. See if your floaters go away.
I just have to, like, this is Kyria. I just have to personally plug this flavor. I haven't even thought about it since I was in high school, but I went to boarding school, and a lot of my friends were from China or Japan, and they would always, like, give us, like, the food that they would get from their care packages at night. So we would be in there, like, and I remember distinctively, like, drinking chrysanthemum in, like, juice boxes, and they're being like, this is really good. And I just remember being like, what is this stuff? But, yeah, like, I haven't had that since then, but I think I'm going to have to get back into it.
Yeah, it's a really nice one. I've got, you know, 3/4 of a pound left at home. Nice. If I've had a long day at the clinic and I get back and you're just kind of like that wired, like, oh, lots of work. Okay, so it's, you know, nice way to calm down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a gentler version and gentler and healthier version than a bottle of wine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Manjingza. Viticis fructus. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to let that go. Okay, so cool, bitter, and acrid enters the urinary bladder, liver, and stomach. So from that, we should be getting a decent amount of the functions. First thing, this is the first herb we've seen go to the urinary bladder. If you see urinary bladder and bitter, you're probably going to see something about urination. And in this case, we're draining dampness. Liver, in this chapter, we're probably talking about the eyes. So here we've got eyes. And stomach, interestingly, not lung. Yeah. Good. So what we're paying attention to here, your drawing of the man that I did, like wind cold comes in the back of the neck, wind heat comes in the mouth. Wind heat affects the lungs, but it can also affect the area. Cold tends to travel through channels. It obeys rules a little bit better. Heat goes wherever the hell it wants. So as the heat comes in, it might affect the tonsils, it might affect the larynx, it might affect the stomach, it also might affect the head and face. This is an herb to deal with all of the other things it's affecting. This isn't so great at getting the wind heat out, so it's not bad at it. It's more about getting the associated places that the heat goes to resolve. So in Bensky, he says, disperses wind and clears heat for externally contracted wind heat, especially when the major complaint is headache or eye pain. So this is a person who's got a fever, got a scratchy voice, has a rapid floating pulse, and it comes into your office and just, my head hurt. I can't open my eyes. My head is on fire. It's burning. I'm sweating. I have usually a frontal headache, stomach channel headache, frontal headache, and eye pain. That's when we start thinking about this one. Benefits the head and eyes. Clears heat in the head. This is wind heat affecting the head. This is the herb, one of the main herbs we think about. Clears and benefits the head and eyes is the second function for liver channel wind heat, manifesting as excessive tearing, red, painful, or swollen eyes, or spots in front of the eyes. When we're talking about heat in the liver channel affecting the eyes, we're usually talking about like dark spots that come and go, whereas blood deficiency or liver yin deficiency, we're usually thinking about floaters in the eyes, in the visual field. We're going to treat those differently. Menjing is also going to drain dampness and expel wind as an auxiliary herb for wind dampness in the limbs, causing stiffness, numbness, cramping, or heaviness. So we use small amounts to aid with wind dampness obstructing the channels. That's it, just helps get it out. Dosage is high on this herb. That doesn't mean, this means that per gram, the herb is weak. Doesn't mean the herb's weak overall. It means we have to increase the dosage to get a functional dose. So if I ask you which warm acrid release exterior herb has a low dosage, you would say which herb?
You said warm acrid?
Mm-hmm. Which herb is 1 to 3 grams? There you go. And if I were to say in cool acrid release exterior, at least so far, which herb has a higher dosage, we might say Menjing. Okay. Oh, okay. We can cover this one and be done. Last thing. A bunch of these herbs have traditional contraindications. I really wish these would largely go away or just be taught somewhat differently, but the board and comprehensive exams love asking a handful of questions about traditional contraindications. So I will also, for sure, ask you about traditional contraindications. I don't think it's wildly important. You just have to know it. Usually the traditional contraindications, when you look at them, you go, of course that's contraindicated. That's a terrible combination. So we don't combine a cool acrid release exterior herb with a warm interior expel cold herb or with an interior cooling herb. So we don't mix it with shigao or futsa. Yeah, that's fine. Otherwise, I don't think this has a whole lot of cautions to it. Yeah, that's it. I mean, other than that, it's cooling and it's bitter, so watch the digestion. You guys understand what I'm saying when I say cool and bitter, so watch the digestion, right? Does that make sense? I just realized I'm not sure if you understand why I'm saying that. Would someone like to take a guess as to why you want to be careful with cool and bitter with the digestion?
Cold diarrhea.
Diarrhea.
Yeah, it'll give you diarrhea, but why?
Cold.
Like, why aren't we concerned about hot and acrid in the digestion? Why is it cold and bitter?
Bitter draws downward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's cold, it'll probably go straight through you.
Yeah, so the cold is going to disrupt the stomach fire and the spleen yang. So when you ingest cold substances, it's difficult for both the spleen and stomach to digest that cold substance. And when you add bitter on top of that, it's almost like it becomes heavier and it's drawing downwards. So the person with weak digestion, you give them a really bitter formula, they're likely to have a really cold and bitter formula. They're likely to have diarrhea, and their digestion may not recover for a little while from that. Antibiotics are extremely cold and bitter, as an example. Okay, let's just do one more because it's very fast. We learned scallions earlier today, not scallions, green onions earlier today. Yeah, scallions. And my mind's blanking on the name. Dan Dou Chi goes with Cong Bai. Cong Bai. So this is also a Dui Yao. It's also a formula. One warm acrid release exterior herb and one cool acrid release exterior herb. Cong Bai and Dan Dou Chi. Soja semen preparatum. They go together. You make a soup. They release the exterior. That's about it. They're not very good at it. So this is more something, if the people around you are getting sick, you start making this in the same way that you might make chicken soup if you're a little bit concerned about getting sick within a Western sense. The dose is a little bit high. It's aged soybeans. Like, I don't really know why we're concerned about the dosage that much. No cautions or contraindications. Let's just pop over to see what Bensky has to say about it. There we go. You guys can see Bensky, right? Good. So, Dan Dou Chi releases the exterior for both hot and cold exterior disorders. Because of its mild character, because it's weak, it is also appropriate for treating patterns of yin deficiency with superimposed exterior disorders. So if this can treat exterior disorders and its function is fairly weak, and it's good for yin deficient patients, what type of patient are we going to use this for?
Older patients.
Old people. You got it. Tom Leung's going to be a little bit annoyed that I'm stealing his fire by going old people in class, but it's okay. Eliminates irritability. Not really. If the person has yin deficiency and there's some heat in the chest and some of it sticks around, this is a gentle way to get it out. That's about it. The rest of this I wouldn't really worry too much about for it. It's just a nice combo as for, say, if you were to be working at an old folks home and wanted something really gentle to help move some stuff.
Does aged mean the same as fermented?
Well, we would have to go down here to nomenclature and preparation to figure out exactly what we're talking about. And I think there's a couple different ways of preparing this one, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's going to be different from Shanghai versus other areas. There's there's a number of varieties of this. Yeah, so most commonly, Qinghao, which is a clear heat from deficiency herb, and Sangye, which we just covered, are made into a decoction, which is then used to steam the black soybeans until they are thoroughly soft. They're then covered with the dregs of the decoction, left to ferment, and finally dried. There you go. That's the most common preparation, but we've got a couple different ones here. I mean, there's a preparation with Huoxiang, which is a relatively strong herb. Yeah. So when we look at the temperature, this is, I think, the only herb that is cold or warm. Sounds like a great quiz question. That's because depending on how you prepare this, you're going to make it a different temperature. Because to a certain degree, soybeans are naturally cold. To a certain degree here, we're steaming other herbs into the soybeans. And then we're going to take the soybeans and we're going to make a tea out of the soybeans. So we're like 3 steps removed from the original herbs that might be too strong. There's a very gentle way of getting it into the person's system. Mix it with fresh scallions. We're good to go. You've made yourself a basic exterior disease clearing thing.
Peter,
Yeah.
sorry, my internet cut out. Is this like miso soup?
Pretty close. Yeah, except that we're going to strain these out. These still look like full beans usually. It's not a paste.
Okay.
And they're dried, so yeah. But it's not that far. Miso soup is basically the same theory, except that miso soup tends to be a bit colder because you usually are adding more tofu, which tofu has shigao in it, which makes it colder. The preparation process usually uses some gypsum. Yeah. You can read through some of the commentary here. There's quite a bit written about this herb, despite the fact that it's not particularly used in contemporary times. As far as I've seen, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I haven't seen much of them. Yeah. But yeah, simple one. Okay, let me make sure I've got everything in the chat. Are eye problems always caused by heat in the liver? No, they can be caused by a bunch of things, but heat in the liver often causes eye problems. How does liver yin deficiency affect the eyes? It causes blurry vision, it makes eyes tired, and it causes floaters and dryness sometimes. Juhua and Goji too. Yeah, Juhua and Goji is great. I hope that was in reference to treating eye conditions. Yeah, Juhua and Goji is really nice. A little bit of honey on top if there's dryness, and you've got everything covered for a nice wind heat recovery drink. Okay, we made it.